Welcome to my true crime channel. Today we will dive into the shocking but true story that happened in the heart of Italy in 2015. This story is about a love doomed to betray life. Stay with us to uncover all the secrets of this tragedy. Subscribe, like, and don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. In 2015, a tragedy broke out in the picturesque of Italy, in the small town of Lecce, which left residents in shock. This is a story about love and a terrible secret. Clara, a woman with golden curls, 42, and her husband Marco, a 46-year-old chef at a local restaurant, have created a seemingly perfect family. They had a 7-year-old son named Luca, and at first glance their life looked serene and happy. Clara and Marco met in the summer, when Clara came to Lecce as part of her student practice. She studied at the Faculty of Pedagogy and decided to spend her summer holidays on the coast to improve her Italian and get acquainted with the culture of the country. On that momentous evening, she went to the Trattoria Isabella restaurant where Marco worked. He was famous for his culinary talents and the ability to create an atmosphere of comfort. Clara immediately attracted his attention. Her smile and warm attitude to life did not leave the chef indifferent. Marco, noticing Clara, approached her with an offer to try the spaghetti with seafood that he had just cooked. It wasn't just a casual acquaintance. Chemistry instantly developed between them. They started a conversation and found out that they share common interests, a love of cooking, art, and outdoor living. Clara easily shared her impressions of the Tuscan landscapes, and Marco responded with stories about his gastronomic experiments. After that evening, their meetings became regular. Every day Clara came to the restaurant, and each time their bond grew deeper. At first it was simple conversations about life and dreams, but then they began to exchange more intimate moments of their lives. Clara talked about her fears and hopes for the future, and Marco shared his experiences, which made their relationship even stronger. Soon, during the summer holidays, there was a very close relationship. One evening, walking along the coastal promenade in the evening, they exchanged their first kisses. This moment was a turning point in their lives. It was a love full of passion and emotion that knew no bounds. Clara realized that she had found her man, and Marco, inflamed by her warmth, dreamed of a future together. After completing her internship, Clara returned to her city, but their relationship was not interrupted. They maintained a long-distance relationship, talking on the phone and spending weekends together when Clara could come to Lecce. A year later, they decided to get married. It happened in the same restaurant where they first met, among close friends and relatives. Thus, their love story began with a simple acquaintance, but soon grew into something more. They became an example for many. Their family, where their son Luke was born, seemed ideal, and no one could have imagined that this adult would be severely tested. But it is this bond based on trust and love that will soon be tested for strength under the pressure of a terrible entity that will arise in their lives. But Clara and Marco's happiness was short-lived. A few years after the birth of their son Luke, the family's life changed dramatically when Clara was faced with a terrible diagnosis: cancer. This diagnosis was made in early 2014 after a series of examinations, to which she was referred by doctors due to chronic fatigue and severe abdominal pain. It was a real shock for Clara, especially considering that she had previously been an active and energetic woman who enthusiastically engaged in raising her son and helped in the restaurant where Marco worked. The first months after the diagnosis were filled with uncertainty and fear. Marco, upon receiving the news of his wife's illness, immediately decided to be there, which caused Clara to feel a sense of support. He had to combine working as a chef in a restaurant and taking care of his wife and son. He often left the restaurant to support Clara on medical procedures, visited doctors, and skillfully selected a diet, guided by the advice of doctors. He cooked her not just simple food, but dishes with the necessary vitamins and nutrients to maintain her strength. Every day he tried to give her optimism, which, according to doctors, was an important aspect of treatment. During this ordeal, their bond only grew stronger. Clara felt that her loved one was always there, ready to help at any moment, and this gave her hope. They talked a lot about the future, made plans for life after the illness. In the summer of 2014, Clara began her journey to recovery. After a successful operation and a course of chemotherapy, doctors reported that the cancer had receded. The degree of remission made them both believe in the wonders of medicine and money and their perseverance. It seemed that they had finally survived the hardest part and could start a new chapter in their lives. Clara's apparent improvement brought joy and relief. Marco even decided to celebrate the occasion by having a romantic evening at the restaurant where they first met. He organized a surprise, inviting close friends and family to inform everyone about her recovery. This evening was filled with joy, laughter, and hope for the future. Clara felt happy again, and as she left the restaurant, dreams of family and trips to Italy with her husband and son sounded in her head. However, their joy was short-lived. Just a few months after the treatment, when it seemed that the disease was in the past, Clara's health began to fade again. She began to complain of unexplained fatigue, loss of appetite, and constant pain, which could not be explained even by experienced doctors. Doctors tried to find the cause, but the diagnoses were different all the time, which only increased their anxiety. Despite the fact that at the beginning they were confident of defeating the disease, anxiety began to affect their relationship. As before, Marco continued to be there, but his support became more like a struggle with despair. He often stayed at work late into the night to somehow distract himself from worrying about his wife's health. This situation affected their budget. It became more expensive to be treated, and this required additional resources. At that time, there was talk about the need for repeated tests, but Marco, remembering the difficult past, was wary of this idea. He reassured Clara that stressful situations would not do any good, and that their lives would continue at the usual pace. The erroneous decision to refuse a thorough examination laid the foundations for a future tragedy. However, this realization of happiness was temporary, and Clara was forced to go to the doctors again amid mounting health problems. More and more questions arose about what exactly was happening to her body, and this uncertainty soon led to the most terrible consequences. With the deterioration of Clara's health, her life and the life of her family became a real test. In early 2015, the woman's condition became critical. At first, this manifested itself in the form of constant fatigue, lack of strength, and apathy. Clara began to avoid socializing with family and friends, which caused Marco anxiety. He noticed that she became less active, practically ceased to be interested in what was happening around her, and spent her days in bed, isolated from the outside world. The situation was getting worse every day. Clara increasingly complained of unbearable abdominal pain and loss of appetite. Headaches and weakness were added to her symptoms. Marco, not wanting to believe that his wife could have something serious, tried to calm her down, claiming that it was just the effects of chemotherapy. He himself could not accept the idea that the disease had returned, and tried to keep Clara busy with household chores and family entertainment. Marco, remaining immersed in his work, often ignored the obvious signs of anxiety that his wife's body gave out. He hoped that this was a temporary improvement that would restore their usual life. However, Clara insisted on getting tested. She knew something was wrong, despite her husband's optimistic assurances. Numerous attempts to persuade Marco to go to the doctor seemed to be fruitless, and the ceremonies only increased her doubts even more. In the end, after much argument and her constant indisposition, Marco agreed to take Clara to a local clinic for a full examination. They met with the doctor, who recommended that they undergo standard blood tests and perform additional examinations, including ultrasound of organs. It took several days of waiting, and finally the results came. When the doctors reported the incredibly high arsenic content in Clara's blood, the information shocked them both. While Marco hardly knew how to behave after hearing what he had heard, Clara felt that her fears were being confirmed. The doctor explained in detail that such a level of toxin in the body could cause serious health problems, including pain and fatigue, and advised to start treatment immediately. This discovery forced Marco to reconsider his recent actions. He remembered that lately he had begun to see changes in his wife's behavior, and this instilled fear in him. By the time the doctors started running additional tests, it became obvious to him that his belief that Clara was just recovering was wrong. Now he had suspicions about his role in this tragedy and whether he might have missed something. Unfortunately, despite the efforts of doctors, Clara's health continued to deteriorate rapidly. After detecting toxic levels of arsenic in her body, she was prescribed a course of treatment that seemed to have no results. Despite all possible attempts by doctors to improve the patient's condition, Clara could not regain her strength. She experienced constant pain, weakness, and lost hope of recovery. Each new day brought new challenges. Clara was hospitalized for several weeks. Marco often sat by her bedside, holding her hand, but in the mountains of confident smiles and support, anxiety slowly grew. The doctors did their best, but time was working against them. And finally, on the evening of one of the days when all sorts of procedures did not bring results, Clara's heart stopped. The death of Clara, who had been struggling with the disease for so long, caused shock among family and friends. The whole city of Lecce was shocked by this tragedy, and many wondered how this could have happened. Soon after her death, there was talk of possible indirect causes, and the general level of suspicion began to grow. Against the background of the tragedy, the investigative authorities launched an official investigation, drawing attention to the situation around Clara and her illness. The case was assigned to two experienced detectives, Antonio Rizzi and Laura Guidi. Antonio Rizzi is an experienced detective with 20 years of experience, who is famous for his working methods and ability to deal with complex cases. He is known for his determination, logical thinking, and ability to look at things from different angles. He had investigated many cases over the years, and now he had to immerse himself in this new one, which required a careful approach. Laura Ferrari is a young, but already trustworthy detective who is distinguished by her wit and vitality. She quickly gained the respect of her colleagues and was able to apply her analytical skills in complex cases. Laura is known for her ability to find details that often go unnoticed, and it is these qualities that make her an indispensable part of the team. Both detectives began an investigation trying to figure out what could have led to Clara's tragic death. They decided to interrogate Marco and Clara's family, as well as analyze the situation in her environment. The investigation was to find out whether potential sources of poisoning could have led to her premature death. Conversations in the city about the high arsenic content in her body only reinforced opinions and suspicions. The detectives began by gaining access to Clara's medical records and her tests, and also drew attention to the changes in her health in recent months. They were also going to carefully examine all the contacts, acquaintances, and connections of Clara and Marco in order to get a complete picture, finding out the presence of suspicious circumstances. The investigation was going to be difficult, and Antonio and Laura understood that in every detail there might be a clue to this tragic story. The investigation confirmed the terrible truth: Clara was poisoned. After a thorough analysis of the medical reports and the announcement of the results of the toxicological examination, it became clear that arsenic was in dangerous quantities in her body. This became an increasingly disturbing fact, and under the pressure of information gathered by detectives Antonio Rizzi and Laura Ferrari, the evidence began to point to Marco. The detectives decided to interrogate Marco, considering him a suspect in the poisoning case. During the interrogation, they used psychological pressure tactics, reminding him of his family and that his actions could make him and his son Luca orphans. The phrase "if you did it" echoed through the room, like a cry for help that could make him think about the consequences of his actions. Marco, under pressure, at first tried to dodge direct accusations, but gradually, exhausted by fears and internal torments, he gave out a shocking thing. He mixed poison into Clara's food to get rid of her and start a new life with Alessia, a woman with black hair and bright appearance. The story with Alessia began a few months ago, when Marco was spending time at a culinary exhibition in a nearby town. She was there presenting her unique project, the opening of an inexpensive but trendy cafe with an emphasis on healthy eating. Alessia, energetic and sociable, attracted Marco's attention. They started a conversation, and Marco was immediately charmed by her confidence and passion for gastronomy. Each time their meetings became more regular. They discussed various culinary ideas, shared tips, and even cooked together. Marco quickly realized that his feelings for Alessia went beyond the usual friendship. She was younger than Clara, and this attraction to her youth and vitality overshadowed his mind. Gradually, in the nooks and crannies of restaurants and cafes, they began to spend nights discussing dreams of a future that could be without Clara. The relationship with Alessia was mercantile. She saw in Marco not only a man, but also an opportunity to move up the career ladder in the world of gastronomy. Alessia used her patrons and acquaintances to catch his attention a little more. Marco, trapped by his own feelings, started making the wrong choices. He believed that the only way to free himself from dark thoughts and unbearable love for Alessia was to get rid of Clara. This realization did not come to him easily. At first, he just thought about leaving Clara, moving on to a new life with Alessia. However, the passions that gripped him affected his consciousness. And, to his own horror, poisoning became the only way he thought he could achieve his goal. While the internal torments were heating up, the attempts to find a justification for their nefarious intentions only intensified. Now, under pressure from the investigation, Marco began to open up about his forgeries, admitting that his decisions were not instantaneous. Every step towards this terrible plan was carefully planned, and he tried to justify his actions by saying that it was necessary for his happiness and the future he wanted to build with Alessia. However, he did not think about what he was doing, how it affected Luke and himself. Detectives recorded his every word, recording details and evidence that could be used against him in court. After making sure they had accumulated enough evidence to substantiate their suspicions, Rizzi and Ferrari knew they had a long way to go before revealing the truth. Marco found himself in a situation from which it was not easy to get out, and his life was forever changed as a result of a thoughtless and tragic choice. Despite Marco's best efforts to try to shift the blame to Alessia, the investigation left no room for doubt about her innocence. During the investigation, detectives Antonio Rizzi and Laura Ferrari conducted a thorough analysis of all the evidence. Although Alessia was present in Marco's life, her role in the tragic events was thoroughly investigated. The testimony of her friends and acquaintances confirmed that she had no selfish intentions towards Clara. Moreover, her alibi on the day of the poisoning did not arouse any suspicion. The investigation focused on the financial and personal aspects of Marco's life, which soon yielded results. Examining his bank accounts, detectives found significant amounts transferred to accounts linked to Alessia. These financial transactions recorded transfers that coincided with the moments when Marco spent time with her. However, all possible evidence that Marco tried to use against Alessia was refuted, and her innocence was officially confirmed. All these circumstances were culminated in the trial, which began a few months after Clara's tragic death. The trial became a hot topic among the locals in Lecce, and the news quickly moved outside the city. There were many witnesses at the court sessions, including friends and relatives of both Clara and Marco. New parallels between loyalty and betrayal were emerging in society, which generated heated discussions in local circles. Marco, being in the courtroom, looked depressed and exhausted. His defender, however, made attempts to create for the audience an image of an innocent man who had lost his family and was now hungry for justice. However, too much evidence has been gathered against him. Marco's testimony that everything that was happening was part of a conspiracy did not resonate with the jury. He tried to claim that his relationship with Alessia was exclusively friendly, and that Clara's actions drove him to despair. But the logic of these statements did not stand up to criticism. The key evidence was provided by the prosecutor. He went through the entire chronology of events in detail, starting with how Clara developed symptoms, pointed out the presence of arsenic, and concluded with a description of all the evidence that accused Marco. The poisons found in the biological samples were identified as those that could only have been obtained as a result of intentional poisoning. After several weeks of hearing testimony and presenting evidence, the court reached a verdict. The jury, having gathered for discussion, was able to come to a consensus. Marco was found guilty of premeditated murder and fatal poisoning of his wife. The court sentenced him to 25 years in prison in an Italian prison. This verdict was the final assessment of his crime and put an end to one of the most high-profile cases in the city. The accusation filled his actions with calculation and betrayal, which completely changed public opinion about a man who was once considered a model of happiness and family well-being. It is quite obvious that this trial was an important stage not only for Marco but also for the entire Lecce community. Residents of the city will continue to discuss this tragedy and the consequences it has led to for a long time. Noisy conversations about betrayal, love and death, about how difficult circumstances can push a person to extreme measures, gave rise to many questions that needed answers. Among those caught in the grip of these events, only the memory of Clara and her life remained, which met its tragic end. The outcome of the tragedy turned out to be inexorable. Clara, despite all the efforts of doctors, could not survive the suffering caused by poisoning. Her condition worsened every day, and when she had only hope in her arms, her heart stopped in the hospital. This happened when little Luke was just 7 years old. At that moment, the world around them collapsed, and circumstances that had always seemed unstable collapsed on the child's head, leaving him without a mother. Clara's death shocked the local community. The residents of Lecce talked about it in whispers, their eyes full of tears. A woman who was once full of life, care, and love has now become the victim of a terrible betrayal. With the new circumstances that arose after the tragedy, Lucas found himself in the spotlight. Due to the fact that his father, Marco, was convicted and imprisoned for 25 years, his grandmother, Clara's mother, took care of the boy. Grandma became Luis's support and protection. Together with her, he moved into her house located near Lecce, in a small, cozy apartment full of memories that once belonged to the highlights of their family. The grandmother tried to surround her grandson with care, but the spirit of sorrow was still in the air. She told him stories about his mother, how Clara treated every moment they spent together with importance, and how much he loved her son. This memory became the basis for the upbringing of Louis, who grew up, will always remember his mother, her love and warmth. Meanwhile, discussions continued in Lecce about the shocking story, which the locals spoke of as a tragic mystery. Every time someone mentioned Clara's name, reminders of betrayal popped up in her mind, like the moment when her life was essentially destroyed. Questions about love, trust, and betrayal demanded answers, and the uniqueness of the situation left a simple human feeling of loss and hopelessness. The woman who almost became a victim of love has now forever remained in the heart of everyone who knew her. The final page of this tragic story will undoubtedly remain in the memory of the residents of Lecce as a strong lesson about how fragile life is. Multiple interpretations of what really happened between Clara and Marco and how his actions affected their family will continue to exist in discussions. There will also be constant thoughts about how important it is to appreciate every moment in life, about the need to openly talk about your feelings, and how to spend time with family and friends. Luca, away from his mother, was now facing the realities that lay ahead, and every new morning reminded him of his loss. But thanks to his grandmother's love, he was finding a new family that was ready to support him on this difficult path. There was a growing understanding around him that, although life is full of suffering, it can also give a light of hope if only you are willing to keep going forward. Before we finish this video, I want to remind you that every story, even the most tragic, carries lessons and opportunities for growth. Saying goodbye to moments full of pain and betrayal also opens the door to new beginnings and hopes. Let's remember that life is fragile and every moment is priceless. If you liked this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. This will help us create more content and share important stories with you. Your feedback and support really matter. Thanks for watching and see you soon.